Professor Ernest Clovis, 3. A French professor who illustrates both sublimation and guardianship. Decathlon score significance: 0 to 1, bottom third; 2 to 3, middle third; 4 to 9, top third. Chapter 1. Maturation makes liars of us all. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. Heraclitus. This book is about how a group of men adapted themselves to life and adapted their lives to themselves. It is also about the Grant study, now 75 years old, out of which this story came. In it, I will offer tentative answers to some important questions about adult development in general, about the people who engaged us in this exploratory venture, about the study itself, and perhaps above all, about the pleasures and perils of very long scientific projects. Originally, the Grant study was called the Harvard Longitudinal Study. A year later, it became the Harvard Grant Study of Social Adjustments. In 1947, it received its now official name, the Harvard Study of Adult Development. But to its members and its researchers, and in early books, it has always been the Grant Study. It began in 1938 as an attempt to transcend medicine's usual preoccupation with pathology and learn something instead about optimum health and potential and the conditions that promote them. The first subjects were 64 carefully chosen sophomores from the all-male Harvard College classes of 1939, 1940, and 1941, who took part in an intensive battery of tests and interviews. That first group was joined by sophomores from the next 3 Harvard classes, resulting in a final cohort, as the panel of subjects in a study of this kind is called, of 268 men. The original intention was to follow these healthy and privileged men for 15 or 20 years, supplementing the intake data from time to time with updates. Thus, an abundance of information would accumulate about the men and the lives they constructed for themselves, information that could be analyzed at will over time and across different perspectives. Interested readers will find much more on the history and structure of the study in Chapter 3. That plan was realized, and more. Almost 75 years later, the Grant study still, remarkably, goes on. We're asking different questions now than the founders asked when the study began, and our investigative tools are different. Of course, the participants are no longer the college sophomores they once were. Those who are still with us are very old men indeed. Time has called many of the beliefs of those days into question, and some much more recent ones, too. How long our current conclusions will hold up, we cannot know. But whatever the uncertainties, asking questions and trying to answer them is always a fruitful process. We actually have learned some of what they wanted to know back in 1938. Who would make it to 90, physically capable and mentally alert? Who would build lasting and happy marriages? Who would achieve conventional or unconventional career success? Best of all, we have 75 years' worth of data that we can refer back to, over and over again if need be, as we try to understand why these things turned out as they did. We can use those data to try to answer other questions, too. There are old ones still open from the early study days, about the relative importance of nature and nurture, for instance, or how mental and physical illness can be predicted, or the relationship between personality and health. There are new ones that could never have been dreamed of in 1938, like what the emotions of intimacy look like in the brain. And some old questions have morphed into new ones, as we learn to formulate ever more cogently just what we're seeking to accomplish in even making inquiries like these. This last in particular is an abiding concern of good science. Thus, this story of the Grant study, how it came to be, how it developed, and how those of us who participated in it developed too. It's the story of what we've learned from it and what we haven't yet. And it's a story about time, studying it and living in it. Longitudinal studies, their structure and purpose.